Hi everyone. I wanted to make a video that looks at some of the more popular allusions that we have in literature, and let's go ahead and take a look at that. So, first off, we start with Absalom. Absalom is a biblical allusion, and with most of these, I have the type of allusion that it is. Often, if you remember from How to Read Literature Like a Professor, often your allusions are either biblical, mythological, Shakespearean, or connected to folklore. Um, and to a lesser extent, a lot of times you have historical allusions. But I wanted to go over some of the more popular ones that you may see referenced. So, first off, we have Absalom. Absalom is a biblical allusion. It's an Old Testament character. And Absalom was the son of David who tried to usurp his father's throne and was killed in battle. Use of the name alludes to personal grief and or a lost and faithless son. And so if you ever have a story where you have a father and son who don't really see eye to eye, and maybe the son tries to take what belongs rightfully to the father, you have an Absalom story going on. I think the most popular example, I say popular, but popular to maybe an English teacher, that is William Faulkner wrote a book called Absalom, Absalom, and it deals with this very theme. I mean, you don't make a reference to Absalom and not have the story go in that direction. Next up is Antigone, and my English 4 class, we're not quite there yet, but we will be reading Antigone pretty soon. And Antigone is the daughter of Oedipus Rex, and if you are familiar with the story of Oedipus Rex, what most people remember is that Oedipus Rex married his mother. But what's important to know is he didn't know she was his mother. He married this woman after he solves the riddle of the Sphinx, and they decide to make him king. And in making him king, they marry him off to the queen, whose husband had recently died. And so they marry Oedipus off to Jocasta, and she's older than him, but not by so much that it makes like a huge difference. I'd probably say she was about 15, 20 years older than him, but he was really young at the time, so he's probably 20, she's about 40, and they get married, they have kids, and the play ends with Oedipus realizing that he married his own mother. She hangs herself, and he gouges his eyes out. It's pretty gruesome. But the theme of Oedipus Rex, one of the many themes, of course, is to know yourself, know who you are. He didn't know who he was, both in the literal sense and in the figurative sense. But he had 4 children. Oedipus had 4 children, and Antigone is one of those children. And she, of course, she's an early feminist character. She was put to death for violating the law and burying her brother against the king's wishes. This alludes to the choice and struggle between justice and the law. Sometimes what is just is not what is legal. What is right often must be done outside the law. And so if you have someone who is struggling with that, they're fulfilling the role of an Antigone character. And keep in mind too, with this one, for it to be an Antigone character, not just a vigilante, needs to be a female character. I'm going to go ahead and say that. If you have a female character who's struggling between what is right and what the law says is legal, you have Antigone. Antigone is also symbolic of the carrying of a curse. If you've ever heard the motif of the sins of the father, her father's curse, which if you read the play, you find he's cursed to marry his mother, kill his father, all this other stuff. She carries that curse, and like any true tragic hero, because Oedipus was a tragic hero, his curse, his tragicness, his flaw affects everyone around him. So for something to be a tragedy, you must have multiple people suffer because of the decisions of someone. And so Antigone carries on her father's curse. And so she's cursed in 2 ways. She's cursed because she carries on the curse that her father carries because he was a father killer and a, let's just say, mother marrier. He was cursed by the gods for that. But also she carries a genetic curse. She's the product of inbreeding. Her dad is also her brother. So she's cursed on multiple levels, and so she carries the curse of Oedipus with her. When she dies, and that's not a spoiler alert; it's a tragedy. So I mean, of course she dies. When she dies at the end of the play, it is the end of the curse that Oedipus carried. Um, I guess I'm trying to think of a modern example of Antigone, but I'm sure you guys, you've probably seen a lot more recent movies than I have. But if you have a female character who's carrying on the curse of her father, suffering because of the decisions of her father. Winter's Bone. There's a movie. It's an early Jennifer Lawrence film. I think it came out in 2011. Winter's Bone is essentially a retelling of Antigone. Minus and again, spoiler alert, minus, I don't believe she dies at the end. But her father was, I believe, he was messed up in drugs, like dealing with meth. And she had to answer for a lot of the stuff the choices he made. So she was a lot like Antigone. Next up, you have Atalanta. Atalanta is basically Annie Oakley. If you've ever seen Annie Get Your Gun, where she sings the song "Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better," that's Atalanta. She was a huntress who promised to marry any man who could beat her in a race, which means that she would not be marrying anybody because no one could beat her in a race. Of course, she was defeated by Hippomenes, who threw 3 golden apples to distract her as she ran. This alludes to strength, speed, and daring being foiled by wit. The Greeks loved characters who were quick on their feet and witty. As you can see with Odysseus in the Odyssey, he's not the strongest, he's not the fastest, but he is the smartest. So Atalanta being beaten by wit is an example of that. But again, I kind of like to lean more on the Annie Oakley type character. The anything you can do, I can do better. That's Atalanta. Okay, next up we have Cassandra. She's the daughter of the Trojan king Priam. She had the gift of prophecy, but was fated by Apollo to never be believed. This alludes often to an accurate but unheeded prophecy of doom. Essentially, you have someone saying that something bad's going to happen and nobody believes them, and then the bad thing happens. That's Cassandra. I believe, and I could be wrong. I'm open to be corrected if I am, but I think Cassandra's line from the Iliad, which is just the Trojan War, is she said, "Beware Greeks bearing gifts." Interestingly enough, it was Odysseus who did that. Odysseus built the Trojan horse, and that Trojan horse was presented to the Trojans as a gift from the Greeks. They pulled the horse in, and the Greeks snuck out in the middle of the night and opened the gates of Troy and let the Greek army in. And it was Odysseus who came up with that. And so if you've never read the Iliad, I mean, I think everyone's read the Odyssey, but some students have read the Iliad and some haven't. The Iliad is the prequel to the Odyssey. It's a war story. It's the war for Troy. And Odysseus becomes the hero because he ends the Trojan War. And Cassandra gave him the prophecy. She goes, "Troy will burn. Beware Greeks bearing gifts." And her prophecy came true, but they didn't believe her until it was too late. Next up, Daedalus and Icarus. And again, this is Greek mythology. This is a father and son duo. In an attempt to escape from King Minos of Crete, they made wings out of wax and feathers, and they flew from the island. Icarus disregards his father's advice and flies too high, melting his wings in the heat of the sun and falls to his death. This can allude to a lot of things. If you make an allusion to Daedalus, you're alluding to someone who's incredibly, incredibly brilliant. Tony Stark is a brilliant, brilliant modern interpretation of Daedalus, just the genius inventor. In fact, I love in the movie Infinity War, where Tony jumps on one of Thanos' ships and flies off, and then Spider-Man sneaks on board. And Tony basically told him to stay behind. But he didn't. He didn't listen to him. He didn't take the advice. And so it's a very Daedalus and Icarus story between them two. Tony's not really his dad, but he is like a father figure to Peter Parker. This also makes an allusion to someone. Icarus would be an allusion to flying too high. They say don't get too close to the sun lest you get burned. It's like someone trying to take more than they can handle. That's Icarus. It's also an example of someone who thinks they know everything, not listening to someone who does know, not everything, but knows more than they do. That's why Icarus is young. Icarus is sort of young. He's not arrogant, but he's very brash. His father is just this genius, and yet he somehow thinks he knows more than he does. So when Daedalus tells him, like, don't fly too high to the sun, Icarus disregards it, and he goes, old man, he didn't know what he's talking about. Well, he did know what he was talking about, because the wings melt, and he just falls down and lands in the sea and dies. So anyway, I'll go ahead and stop right there. If you have any questions, shoot me a message.